We're back. I'm George Galloway.
And I am Steve Topple.
And we're back with some scintillating topics. It's difficult to know where to start, Steve, because we've had this short 2-week break.
Indeed.
But as we speak, the Labour National Executive Committee is grappling with what has been the issue of the summer, namely the issue of anti-Semitism, how to define it, and how a political party, Labour, with large numbers of people in it who have long supported the Palestinian cause, can define anti-Semitism in a way that deals with the anti-Semitism, but doesn't silence people who are determined to stand up for the Palestinian people. Now, it's, I think, an open secret that Labour is going to capitulate to the demands of the Israel lobby, which have been expressed all the way from Benjamin Netanyahu down to a phalanx of Labour MPs, some of whom are in the public prints threatening to go on strike. Who would know? If a lion from Billy Smart's circus entered Parliament and ate a Labour MP every day, it would be weeks before anyone knew they were missing.
I'd get front row tickets.
Quite a lot of people think that. But the damage to Corbyn, inside the bubble at least, amongst the political class in the country, must have been considerable. You cannot be called a virulent, he's now no longer just an anti-Semite, that's for the hoi polloi. He's a virulent anti-Semite, a Jew hater, according to Dame Margaret Hodge. Indeed, she said Labour was consumed with Jew hatred, which makes you wonder why she wants to remain in it.
Well, indeed.
But it must have been damaging, at least amongst a certain class of people, this whole summer of discontent on this issue. How do you see it now from your point of view?
How do I see it? I think, well, I mean, we've been off air 2 weeks, and they say a week is a long time in politics. Quite. I mean, it's quite staggering what has gone on in the fortnight we've been away and what we've come back to. And it's hard to sort of know where to sum it up, as it were. But I agree with your assertion in some respects that this may have been damaging to Corbyn. In our Twitter sphere, if you like, we're both quite enveloped by Labour supporters and sort of prominent members of the Labour Party and prominent members of the grassroots Labour movement. I'm privy to quite a lot of private conversations from grassroots Labour people, and they're like, no, it's fine, it's just emboldened Corbyn. I don't think he's come out of this unscathed.
No,
however,
it's shaken his confidence, obviously, because he hasn't performed well on this issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I don't think it's necessarily damaged him too much in the eyes of the public, but I think as a man and as a politician, this cannot have not affected him, as it were, because he hasn't been as forthright. Whether you agree with Labour's that they should adopt the IHRA position, or whether you agree with Corbyn's line, whatever side you're on, I think you can probably all agree that Corbyn hasn't necessarily handled this as well as he could. Whether you think he should have been more forthright in opposing it, or more forthright in
if you were going to capitulate last May.
Yes, exactly.
What was the point of May, June, July, August, September?
Yeah. If
you were going to capitulate anyway.
Yeah.
But it has, I think, diminished him a bit, but it's diminished others more. John McDonnell, for example, is openly on manoeuvres, seeking, whether he's speaking for Corbyn or not, you can make a judgment on that, but he has effectively capitulated for Corbyn.
Yeah.
And increasingly frantically, I saw him on the late night news the other night, saying he was sure that everybody would be satisfied by what the NEC decides today, when in truth, absolutely nobody will be satisfied.
Indeed, I mean he's been on manoeuvres for months, as we've discussed before on this show. But I think so. Let's talk about that. Actually, let's talk about the IHRA and what's going to happen. Because as we say, we're recording this on a Tuesday lunchtime, so we don't know the decision as yet. But I watched Victoria Live on BBC Two this Tuesday morning, and they had Richard Burden, Labour MP. I have to say, I'd never heard of him.
I was in Beirut in a refugee camp with him in 1977.
Oh, okay. I never heard of the man, I have to say. But he was talking, and he seems to think that the NEC may adopt the full IHRA, but with some caveats. Now, this is where the debate sort of gets sticky, isn't it? Because the sort of nuts and bolts of it are, we have these 11 areas of the IHRA, 7 of them relate in no way to the state of Israel, and there's 4 which are the contentious ones, aren't they? Which includes saying that the state of Israel is a racist endeavour. Now, the capitulation
and the earth is round,
and I thought it was flat. And then you have these 4 areas: one, the state of Israel being a racist endeavour, and this is the sticking points. Now, the caveats that Richard Burden was talking about are that it gives some manoeuvre, if you like, in criticism of Israel as a state and its actions. And he interestingly pointed out that in 2016 the Home Affairs Select Committee released a report on the IHRA, and they recommended that there was some
Shukla Amuna was on that committee, by the way, and supported the Select Committee's caveats he now believes Labour must not adopt.
I did know that, yes. Yes, we won't talk about him today. So there's this debate about caveats and whether they should adopt them or not. I think I'm in agreement with you. I don't want to put money on it because we're going to be shown to be fools if it doesn't happen. I think they will adopt the full IHRA just to try and attempt to put this issue to bed. However, it's not going to go to bed, is it? Because Margaret Hodge quite openly came out several days ago and said that this issue will not go to bed until, I think this was her exact words, Corbyn is got rid of.
Exactly.
And so
he cannot solve the problem because he is the problem.
Exactly. She's just opened up the game completely and admitted that it's about Corbyn, essentially. It's not about the issue of anti-Semitism.
And Corbyn's internal party position just grew stronger. The JC9 were handsomely re-elected to the National Executive Committee. The challengers were roundly defeated. The Progress Blairite rump in the Labour Party, it was 2-1. So in the next round, after the Labour conference later this month, Corbyn's position on the National Executive will be considerably stronger than it is now. So what are they going to do, these people? Are they going to challenge him for the leadership again? In which case the rout would make Owen Smith's rout look like a tea party? Or are they going to do something I predicted almost 3 years ago? Pass another second motion of no confidence in Corbyn as the parliamentary leader of the Labour Party and elect their own parliamentary leader. If they did that, a state of formal dual power would exist within the Labour Party. The Labour Party would have a leader who was not the leader of the Labour MPs in Parliament. Now, this would be a big risk for the MPs to take because it would almost certainly mean a big push to deselect the rebel MPs that had overthrown Corbyn as the parliamentary leader. So we're still in deep waters here, aren't we?
We are, indeed. I love your assessment. I think it's fascinating, that notion, and I think it could well happen because they are literally running out of options now because, as you said, on Monday, the full JC9, as it's called, was elected, even Pete Wilsman and the furore that surrounded.
I was so happy with that. He was so shamefully treated.
It was, I mean, even if you are of a school of thought where his comments were could be classed as anti-Semitic. The man has done everything within his power to apologise for these comments. He's going on training apparently to rectify this. But yeah, I mean, the reactions from, and what was interesting about that as well, just going off on a tangent slightly, was the reactions from the mainstream media, Corbyn supporting motley crew, the likes of Matt Zarb, Cousin and Owen Jones.
The celebrity
Corbynistas who have got more cheeks than your and mine's arseholes put together. They were sort of very unhappy that Wilson was elected. I'm on the fence with that. However, the fact that the JC9 was fully elected is now one weapon, if you like, out of the Blairite army, because there was a distinct, we mentioned it again on the programme, a distinct effort to derail the JC9, wasn't there, to try and so Corbyn would lose any control he was going to have of the NEC. That's out the window now. So they haven't got that. The issue of anti-Semitism, if Labour adopt the full IHRA today, then they have no room for manoeuvre there. So they are running out of options. And I think what you've said is going to be a distinct possibility, because they've got very little left.
There are three possibilities. A new leadership campaign contest. My scenario of effectively a parliamentary breakaway from the Labour Party, whilst, as Frank Field is doing, we'll talk about him later,
we will,
seeking to remain in the Labour Party, but an independent in Parliament. And the third is the full Buna, the breakaway, and the formation of a new party.
Yes.
These are the only three options left now, really. Now, something else happened today. I don't know if you caught it. The Times of London, the paper of record, as was, ran a story in which it said, in the headline and in the copy of the text, that the head of MI5 had summoned Jeremy Corbyn for a meeting to give him the, quote, facts of life. Now,
sorry, has Jeremy Corbyn got children?
Well,
have I missed something here? Is there the cucumbers involved?
I don't know about you, but they have missed some really important things. But before I come on to them, this is the clearest indication yet that they know that Jeremy Corbyn has a very real chance of being Britain's next Prime Minister. Otherwise, why would they be summoning him?
Well,
but the second thing they've missed is that MI5 work for the Prime Minister. Employees do not summon their boss. And we've been here before. As you know, I'm something of a student of Labour history. Indeed, I am Labour history.
You're part of it,
50
Mr.
years
Galloway.
Of it. Harold Wilson, who was no threat to British capitalism.
No threat to much at all, was he, really?
No, not really. But he was sufficiently thought to be a threat in the 1970s that MI5 bugged and burgled him all over London. I use these words because these are the words of Peter Wright, the MI5 chief who was conducting the bugging and the burgling in his famous book Spycatcher, which was Mrs. Thatcher tried to ban in Britain, was published in Australia, and became a worldwide sensation. They described in detail how they had spied on Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister of Britain, his own security services, how they'd bugged him, how they'd burgled his houses, and so on. So Jeremy Corbyn, I think we can agree, is a tad, not much, but a tad more radical.
It's a bit more to the left.
Wilson, a bit more to the left, and a bit more of a challenge to the prevailing orthodoxy. If Harold was bugged and burgled, what about Jeremy Corbyn? Now, either the Times have misrepresented MI5, and I hope that that's true, and they have misrepresented many people over the years, so it's quite possible that it's true, but in which case MI5 have to make that clear. Because if the Times has not misrepresented them, or if they do not require the Times to clarify this, this is the language of coup against British democracy. A very British coup announced in the Times, but a coup nonetheless. It's an attempt to say we, the deep state, the ongoing power, the secret power, can tell the Prime Minister or the next Prime Minister what to do.
Exactly so. I mean, and because the bookies' odds aren't shifting either, are they?
No,
I mean,
it's 4-1 favourite.
Yeah. Still 4-1 favourite. And no,
Philip Hammond, by the way, is 50-1.
Is he? That's rather
You
good
and I
for
have
him.
got more chance of being Prime Minister than the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Sorry, go on.
No, it's quite. Yeah, it is staggering that if like you say, if they don't deny this or don't ask for a clarification, then it is essentially quite a staggering admission that, as you say, the Secret Service is summoning the leader of the opposition, future Prime Minister. But of course, in 2016, we had the leader of the military in this country coming out saying there would be a damn coup if Corbyn was elected, if you remember rightly.
I do, yeah. Was he the leader or was it a former leader? I can't remember now, but some general said so.
Yeah,
and that passed too quietly.
Yeah.
Because that too was potential announcement of treason.
Exactly, but if you look across the pond, and we've discussed Trump many times on this program, and we've always been very clear that neither of us are fans of him at all. He's a despicable man. However, you have to try and view him with some balance. And across the pond, you have the President of the United States under immense pressure from the deep state and being manipulated as such, which you can see with Trump's approach to Middle Eastern policy, how it's changed from his pre-election pledge to pull the US out of the Middle East
to today's warning to the Syrians
exactly.
against liberating Idlib from ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Of course. So the deep state is blatantly interfering in US politics, and therefore the assumption has to be that the same thing is happening over there. And you make an excellent point with Harold Wilson, because I think it's quite often all too easy to look at the times we live in through a very thin window, very thin prism that, well, this is now and these kind of things can't happen now. I mean, as you say, MI5 was spying on the British Prime Minister in the 70s. So what the hell are they doing now? Of course this stuff is still going to be going on. And it's just, I think it's more out in the open because of the age of the internet and because...
well, I believe that the last few months, I grew up in a Marxist milieu. So Lenin's The State and Revolution, and in theory, of course, I knew that in the end, the state is an armed body of men. Or to quote Chairman Mao, in the end, all political power comes down the barrel of a gun. I knew that in theory. But I never knew it in practice in Britain. I assumed, perhaps I inherited this from my late father, that these things happened elsewhere, abroad, not to us. We were a democracy, a long-standing one. Power could shift and change democratically in Britain, and that the deep state were in the end servants of the state, and the state was run by the democratically elected parliament. That's what I believed about Britain. But the last few months have begun to shift my opinion about that. Because somebody somewhere, probably not a body or a place, but somebody somewhere has decided, probably by osmosis, that Corbyn has to be stopped. He has to be removed. And if he can't be removed, he has to be cut off at the legs. And everyone has moved with military precision to bring this around. So that the entire media, from the BBC and the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, all the way, if that's a big distance, to the Guardian, and to the New Statesman and the kind of liberal intelligentsia, the entire spectrum has wheeled like a military parade and trained their guns on Corbyn. And nothing has been allowed to stand in the way. Certainly not truth, not balance, not perspective. None of these things have been allowed to stand in the way. And that shows me that democracy in Britain is in danger, at least, of being little more than a fraud, a lipstick on a pig. And lipstick, as we both know, can very easily be wiped off.
It can indeed.
It's a fantastic period to be alive in, however. It's extremely exciting. The possibility of democratic and radical change in Britain is very much alive. Do you know there was a poll today which was a poll of voters aged 18 to 24. So if only 18 to 24-year-olds could vote in Britain, the House of Commons would look like this. 600 Labour MPs, 24 Liberal Democrat MPs, and 0 Conservative MPs. Just think about that.
Now, I have to make an admission at this point. We're not big television viewers in the Topple household. You can ask my partner, who's on Twitter, Nicola. We're more interested in talking shop and being on social media. However, I have heard that the new Jed Mercurio drama, The Bodyguard, has been taking the world of television by storm. All I seem to see about it, and what's standing out in my mind, is a rather horrible image, if you like, of Theresa May fornicating with a G4S employee. However, George is apparently a big fan of this programme, and I've got to get up to speed. So here is an education for Mr. Topple in The Bodyguard. George!
I'll have to get that image out of my mind,
yes,
of Theresa May making the beast with 2 backs with G4S. I mean, they do it anyway, and it's us that they're doing.
Right.
And I'm sorry if that's a little rude. But the Bodyguard is the best thing the BBC has done in maybe decades. And it's pulling in record viewing figures.
You said something like 12 million?
12.6 million was for the last episode. And it's because it has a real verisimilitude. It's about actually what people think is really happening in the state. And it relates actually to our previous discussion about MI5. Because the story is, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, of the British Home Secretary, a woman, who is determined to become the Prime Minister. So her whole-time job is not actually fighting terrorism, but using the fight against terrorism to fight her own Prime Minister so she can take his job. And she makes a Faustian pact with MI5 that if they will help her into number 10, she, in return, will start to give MI5 the powers that are currently held by the police. Now, I was, as you know, nearly 30 years in Parliament, and this is a real dichotomy, and at times has provoked real crisis in the state, especially at the height of Irish Republican terrorism in Britain, where the police were insisting this is our patch, and the security services were saying this is too big for you. You're too amateur. You're too hidebound by the rules and restrictions that come from being a publicly accountable service. On the other side of that argument, and in The Bodyguard, it's perfectly reflected that the police are accountable to the public. They can be questioned nowadays through police and crime commissioners, through the House of Commons. You can ask questions in the Commons about police conduct, which you could never do about Secret Service conduct. They just reply, we never comment on the security services. Even the London Assembly can grill the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. But you couldn't do that if the power to act was actually residing in the MI5 and MI6 buildings. So it's a genuine dichotomy in a democracy. There are a few democracies, and certainly not ours, that have handed over policing in the state to secret, unaccountable organizations, shadowy, working outside the law, because MI5 and MI6 effectively work outside the law. We're dependent on having a Home Secretary and a Prime Minister that are actually insisting on the services obeying the law. And as we know, given the kind of Prime Ministers and Home Secretaries we've had, that's not a safe assumption. And of course, there's a piquancy thrown in. He's not a G4S employee, but he is her personal protection officer. And he begins an affair with the Home Secretary, which itself happened in real life.
Did it?
Alan Johnson When he
Oh,
was the Home Secretary, I'm sorry to intrude, Alan, I don't mean to hurt you. His wife ran away with his personal protection officer
yes.
because they were up close and personal. He was practically living in the house, and he availed himself of the Home Secretary's wife, and the rest is history.
So what do you think is making it so popular though? Is it this sort of art imitating life? Is it the sort of along the lines of why James Bond is so popular, because sort of spying and espionage and political scandal is a very British sort of British thing we like, isn't it? It's something that makes our mouths water, or is it something else? Why is it?
No,
Why is
it's all of that.
acting
It's all of that and more. Mercurio is a truly stupendously brilliant director. He made Line of Duty, which is another really popular show. He's got a grasp on political reality. So I, as a political animal, I recognize everything in the show. There's nothing that I look at and say, that could never happen.
Yeah.
Even the House of Commons scenes are extremely convincing. It's also budget, you can't get away from it. As this show proves, if you've got no budget, it's hard to make good television. But Topple Galloway, which has a massive budget, thanks to you,
Yes.
top-notch TV. I'd watch it, Steve, if I were you. It's on BBC One, terrestrial television, no dish required, only a license. Should I mention that? As Ken Livingstone pointed out, and by the way, Ken Livingstone's a fine economist, much greater grasp of economic policy than some people understand. As he pointed out this week, Britain has now for 10 years been in the grip of austerity, not by some act of God or a natural calamity, but as a result of political decision making by Gordon Brown, followed by David Cameron, now perpetuated by Theresa May. 10 years of austerity, as Ken pointed out, and nothing is fixed. It's just that the poor got considerably poorer. Steve is associated with a book that's just come out, the Austerity Anthology. He's written the foreword for it, and indeed, his whole life is an anti-austerity life. Steve, tell us about this book.
It is. I'm not big on self-promotion. My partner Nicholas always moans at me saying, "You don't promote yourself enough." I'm not a fan of it. However, I am a fan of this book, and I want to say a few words about it because there's a broader point to be made with it. But yes, so I've written the foreword for a book called the Anti-Austerity Anthology. It's a collection of poems, essays, and short stories, all around the theme of austerity and the impact it's had since the 2007-2008 financial crisis, the impact it's had on the poorest people in UK society, and also it kind of addresses the issue more globally because this is a global phenomenon we've seen, isn't it? The cutting back of public services for what was essentially a private financial crisis. So it's a book, it's a collection. It's quite radical, if you like. It's not sort of Jeremy Corbyn territory. Some of these writers are quite anarchists.
John McDonnell won't have it on his desk.
He might. John
might have it under his desk.
He might, yes, or under his pillow. If you're watching John, it's very good. Only $8.99. It's more radical than that, and it's the thinking behind it is quite. I'd say some of it's quite anarchist, some of it is anti-capitalist, some of it is mainstream democratic socialism. But it's a great collection, and every single penny that's made from the sales of the book go to food banks. So the point of the book is firstly to raise awareness of austerity, give some alternative viewpoints, but also to raise money for food banks. And it's doing quite well, actually. I was quite surprised.
How do you get it?
How do you get it? You can get it via Amazon. Unfortunately, I know it's an issue for some people, but because of the way it's published, it's been done completely independently. There's been no budget. No one's charged for their time for doing it. In fact, the three guys who put it together are all friends of mine, very good writers, a guy called Rupert Dreyfus, another guy called Mike Robbins, and a guy called Harry Whitewolf. They've put it together. They haven't charged for their time. They've done it all off their own backs. And Amazon, unfortunately, at the minute for independent publishers, is the easiest way to do it. But you can buy it on Amazon. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you can also find it on my Twitter. All the money goes to food banks. But there's kind of a broader point to be made with the book as well. You probably, when people read it, they most likely won't have heard of any of the writers. There's a guy called Matt Black, who's quite prominent on Twitter. He's quite an anarchist, but he's a brilliant poet. There's an author called Rebecca Granstein, another sort of marginal writer who, again, is exceptional. But no one will have heard of these voices. However, what's important about the book is that every single writer has direct experience of the effects of austerity, whether that be that they've been on reliance on the welfare state and have seen their benefits cut, or they've been in low-paid precarious employment, or they've been forced into low-paid precarious employment because of the current climate for the gig economy. Everyone has been affected by it, and it's what makes the book a bit unique. Because there's a real, if you notice on Twitter, a real backlash against people being angry at the minute. There was a column by Helen Lewis in the New Statesman last week.
How could anyone tell? It's like being slandered in an empty room.
Well, I know, indeed. It was very useful when I ran out of toilet paper. It was a great column by her. Saying that why are people so angry with this anger that people are angry, and this is terrible. It's making toxifying politics. She said this anger that people are feeling, and it's all because of those damn Scots. It was a damn Scottish and their damn referendum that's caused it, and also Brexit. Damn Brexit. Damn. And she was blaming it all on Scots referendum and the Brexit decision, and saying that this anger, we had enough of this. Must stop. Anger must stop. Toxifying politics, without understanding why people are so bloody angry. And there's a narrative forming around this at the minute. You see it from sort of a lot of the Guardian commentators as well, and especially around the Labour issue at the minute, and that you must stop being so angry. We've all got to get along, and not understanding why people are. And this book encapsulates the point of view of people who are angry and the reasons why they're angry, but it also shows that there is another narrative out there, aside from these supposedly left-leaning commentators that we see in the mainstream press, that there are accomplished and talented commentators and writers outside the mainstream sphere with exceptionally good arguments as to why people are angry. It's just that they don't get the column inches in the Guardian.
No, of course not. For me, the Guardian and the New Statesman are hyenas in sheep's clothing. They are straight out of the Fabian playbook.
Yes.
They cannot understand why the poor are enragés, why the sans-culottes might possibly be angry. Why can't they eat cake and read the New Statesman?
Exactly.
That's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
And the great thing about you and your friends, though I have political differences with you and them, is you're speaking for the people who are angry with a reason.
Yeah.
They're angry because they are poor and because the system has no capacity to fix the problems in their lives.
Exactly.
And if you're not angry about that, that means you've joined the ranks of Fabianism.
Indeed.
And trust me, good men and women falling amongst Fabians is one of my pet hates. Well, look, we've been Topple Galloway, and this is the first in our new season. We've already broadcast a season exclusively on patreon.com/George Galloway. But for 1 month only, we're going to air the dazzling repartee that is Topple Galloway, entirely free. You just have to go to our Facebook page, to Steve Topple's YouTube page, and of course here on Patreon. And those who are on Patreon and paying the princely sum of around 65 pence per month for Topple Galloway will get some, how do you put it, behind the scenes footage.
Outtakes.
Thanks very much for joining us for this week's Topple Galloway. And if you liked it, come back next week with another viewer. Why don't you?
Just one more thing, this time about Frankfield. My mate George Galloway was one of the few commentators with a high profile to mention Field's despicable history and legacy towards disabled people. It was totally missing from most of the rhetoric surrounding Frank Field. It was all about Brexit, it was about immigration. But let's talk about this briefly. Frank Field was the man who said learning disabled people should be paid less than the national minimum wage because, and I quote from his report, they are less productive than average workers. This is the man who said not once, but twice, that troublesome families, troublesome in his opinion, should be housed in corrugated iron underneath a motorway. This is a man who drove through some of the most nefarious welfare reforms, as he was one of the architects under Blair's government, and this is also a man who worked for David Cameron as a poverty czar, and even Cameron thought some of his ideas were too outrageous. This glorification of Frank Field has been absolutely horrific. He is nothing more than a moral septic tank and the Victorian modern-day eugenicist mindset where there is a deserving and undeserving poor. Good riddance to bad rubbish.
Just one more thing, again, about Frank Field. If you Google anti-Semitism, Jews, Jewishness, anything to do with the current anti-Semitism controversy, you will not find a single reference to Frank Field having the remotest interest in it. And yet, we're asked to believe by Frank Field that the reason he's quit the Labour Party is his mounting concern about anti-Semitism. Steve Topple just called him a septic tank. I call him a coward, a liar, and a hypocrite. Frank Field, good riddance, bad rubbish.